The composition panel is this guy right here. It's currently highlighted in orange. And we know it's the composition panel because it says the name of our comp here. It has many controls, and this is pretty much what we're going to show our audience once we're done with our comp. So I'm going to go ahead and expand everything by moving these guys out of the way so we can talk about some of the tools here. Now, of course, on the upper right-hand corner, we have a menu. We can undock this panel, we can maximize this frame, and we can look at our composition settings. Of course, we can do that also here in this menu. We can also enable motion blur, frame blending, draft 3D, the transparency grid, and that's really helpful when you want to see this little grid back here, which we'll talk about here as well. This is also the same thing. And like in Photoshop, when we create PNGs, we get this transparency or the .psd format when we want to bring artwork into After Effects. So whenever you want to be reminded of that, what areas are transparent, you can go ahead and turn that on here or that menu. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some of the options. Now, one of the options that you want to deal with, of course, is your magnification, which means if I have it up to 200%, I'm zoomed in pretty close to my comp. I can, of course, fit up to 100%, or I can go ahead and choose fit. I have the ability to click here, and when I click here, I can go ahead and go to a certain time in my comp, so I can go ahead and enter the values, and I'll be taken to that location. I can go ahead and click here to see the different channels in my comp. Now, when you're working in video, you're working in RGB, which is red, green, and blue, and whatever alpha you may have in there. So if we want to look at the red channel, we can see the pixels that make up the color red, the pixels that make up the color green, and blue. Now what I can also do is see the alpha channel. So let me go ahead and move this background out of the way. And we can see the alpha channel that the Rhino actually lives in. So this information here is how we're able to see through to the background. I'll undo a couple of times to put that back. Something that's really a time saver is when you have a very complicated comp and you don't want to see everything every single time you do a quick test render, you can choose something called a region of interest. And we can do that right here. When I click on this little box, I can select an area of my comp, and I can see that area behind it. So I can go ahead and expand it as well. And every time I render, I can just see what's happening here as opposed to the entire composition at one time. Let me go ahead and turn that off. I can also change my active camera. So when we're in 3D mode, you can go to the front, left, and other cameras. And we'll talk about this when we get to the 3D modes, which is really cool. You can also change how many views you have. Currently we have one view, but we can go to 2 views, and we can change that to vertical if we like. And let me just go ahead and put this back to the way it was so we can just see that here in the actual interface. So we can change our views, and we can even go up to 4 views, which is kind of handy sometimes. Now, in this particular comp, let me show you something that I have here. I have this background image, I have the Rhino, and I also applied to the Rhino a filter. Let me just go ahead and see if it's still on there. So as you can see here, I have a change color effect on here. So if I want to see an actual graph of this, I can enable, let me go ahead and move this over, this guy right here, which gives us a flowchart. And the flowchart shows us the relationships between things in our comp. Now by default, it might be collapsed like so. So just click right here, and it opens up. So we can see what's happening inside of our comp. So we see our comp, we have the rhinoceros picture, and we see that we have a change color applied to it. And we also have our other image. So it's really a nice, cool way to see what's going on. And I can also move these things around to make more sense of my chart. So I can be reminded of all the things that are going on in particular images. Let me go ahead and close this chart here. And last but not least, I want to talk about the exposure we have here. So I can go ahead and change my exposure and lower it. So that's a look at the many tools that we have that live on the bottom and of course the menu of the composition panel.